The champagne glass trembled in my hand as laughter erupted around me. 25 years after graduation, and here I was, still the outsider. But in exactly 17 minutes, everything they thought they knew about Sarah Chen would shatter like glass hitting concrete. I'd love to know which corner of the globe you're watching from. And if the story speaks to you, make sure to subscribe. Tomorrow's video is one you absolutely can't miss. The ballroom of the Grand Meridian Hotel buzzed with the kind of artificial energy that only comes from people desperately trying to prove their lives turned out better than expected. Crystal chandeliers cast warm light over faces I hadn't seen in decades. Faces that had aged in ways both kind and cruel. Some had grown softer, others sharper, but the hierarchy from Jefferson High School seemed to have frozen in amber. I smoothed down my simple black dress and surveyed the room. Designer gowns sparkled under the lights, diamond jewelry caught the glow, and expensive watches gleamed on wrists that gestured dramatically during animated conversations about vacation homes and luxury cars. I felt like I was watching a performance, one where everyone had memorized their lines about success and happiness. Sarah Chen, the voice made me turn. Standing before me was Madison Pierce, former head cheerleader, now sporting perfectly highlighted blonde hair and what was clearly a very expensive facelift. Her smile was as bright and sharp as a scalpel. "Oh my goodness, I almost didn't recognize you. You look exactly the same." The pause before exactly the same carried the weight of 25 years of unspoken judgment. "Madison?" I replied with a genuine smile that seemed to confuse her. "You look wonderful. How have you been?" "Oh, living the dream." She gestured broadly, her tennis bracelet catching the light. "Richard, you remember Richard Blackwood from our class? Well, he's my husband now, and he just made partner at Blackwood and Associates. We have the most gorgeous house in Westchester, and the twins just got into Yale. Both of them." Her laugh was musical and hollow. "But enough about me. What have you been up to? Are you still working?" The way she said working made it sound like a communicable disease. "I am," I said simply. Before Madison could probe further, a small crowd began to gather. Word travels fast at reunions, especially when there's potential entertainment involved. I recognized faces from different social circles. The former football captain, Derek Morrison, now carrying an extra 60 pounds and a receding hairline. Jessica Webb, who'd been valedictorian and now wore her success like armor. And Tommy Rodriguez, whose family had struggled financially, but who now sported a Rolex that could probably pay for a small car. "Sarah Chen!" Derek's voice boomed across the growing circle. "Man, I was wondering if you'd show up. Heard you're still doing that, what was it, government thing?" "Something like that," I replied, taking a small sip of champagne. Jessica stepped closer, her eyes narrowing with curiosity. "I tried looking you up on LinkedIn, but your profile is pretty sparse. What exactly do you do for the government? DMV? Post office?" The question came with a slight smirk that suggested she already knew the answer wouldn't impress anyone. "I work in consulting," I said, which was technically true in the most understated way possible. Tommy laughed, a sound that held more edge than humor. "Consulting? That's what people say when they don't want to admit they're unemployed." The group chuckled, and I felt that familiar tightness in my chest. Not from embarrassment, but from the sheer predictability of it all. "Actually," Madison interjected with false sweetness, "I think consulting can be quite lucrative. I mean, look at Richard's firm. Though, I suppose it depends on what kind of consulting." She let the sentence hang like a question mark made of poison. More classmates drifted over, drawn by the scent of drama. There was Patricia Hayes, who'd married a tech mogul and never let anyone forget it. Marcus Thompson, who'd built a small empire in real estate. And Stephanie Liu, whose fashion boutiques had made her locally famous. Each arrival added another layer of expectation to the moment, another pair of eyes waiting to see how the quiet girl from high school would measure up to their obvious success. "You know what I heard?" Patricia's voice dropped to a stage whisper that carried perfectly across the circle. "I heard Sarah still lives in the same apartment she had right after college, in Arlington. My friend Rebecca lives in that area. Well, she used to, before she moved to Potomac, and she said she saw someone who looked just like you at the metro station during rush hour on a Tuesday." The implication hung in the air. Taking public transportation on a weekday could only mean one thing in their world: you couldn't afford not to. Marcus shook his head with theatrical sympathy. "Man, that's rough. I mean, the metro's not terrible, but at our age, I haven't been on public transport since we were broke college kids." He adjusted his cufflinks, which were clearly meant to be noticed. "You should really consider getting into real estate, Sarah. I could set you up with some entry-level positions. Nothing glamorous, but it's honest work."
The condescension in his voice was thick enough to cut with a knife. "That's very kind," I said, genuinely meaning it. Marcus had always been decent, even if he was completely missing the mark now. Stephanie jumped in with the enthusiasm of someone who'd found a project. "Or retail. Honestly, government consulting sounds so limiting. How much growth can there really be in that sector? I started with one boutique and now I have 12 locations. There's so much opportunity in the private sector if you're willing to take risks." "The thing is," Derek added, warming to the subject, "some people just aren't built for taking risks. Not everyone can handle the pressure of real success. There's nothing wrong with playing it safe, working for the government, getting that steady paycheck. Modest ambitions, modest results, right?" The circle nodded in agreement, their faces showing a mixture of pity and self-congratulation. Here they were, successful people taking time out of their important lives to offer career advice to their less fortunate classmate. It was charity work of the finest kind. Jessica, ever the academic, couldn't resist adding her own analysis. "It's actually quite common among our generation. The fear of entrepreneurship, the need for security over growth. Some people peak in high school and college, and that's okay. Not everyone can handle the demands of constantly evolving and adapting in competitive markets." "Exactly," Madison agreed, her voice dripping with manufactured concern. "And there's absolutely nothing wrong with that, Sarah. You found your level, and that takes a certain kind of self-awareness. It's actually quite mature." Tommy raised his champagne glass in mock salute. "Here's to Sarah, proof that not everyone needs to conquer the world. Someone's got to keep the government running while the rest of us build empires." The group laughed, and several people actually clinked glasses. I stood in the center of their circle, watching this performance with a mixture of anthropological fascination and mild irritation. These people had constructed entire identities around their material success, and they needed someone like me, or their version of me, to validate those constructions. "You know what?" Derek continued, emboldened by the group's response. "I bet Sarah's got the best work-life balance of all of us. Home by 5, weekends free, probably takes actual vacations instead of working deals from beach resorts. There's something to be said for that kind of simplicity. Government benefits are supposed to be excellent too. Health insurance, pension plans, job security. It's not glamorous, but it's practical. Very practical." The word practical seemed to sum up their entire assessment of my life. Safe, boring, unremarkable, but practical. They'd placed me neatly into a category that made them feel better about their own choices, their own sacrifices, their own definitions of success. What they couldn't see, what none of them could possibly imagine, was that in approximately 8 minutes, their entire understanding of success, power, and importance was about to be redefined in the most spectacular way possible. But for now, I simply smiled and let them have their moment of superiority. After all, the best revelations are worth waiting for. The conversation had shifted into full swing now, with each person trying to outdo the others in demonstrating just how far they'd climbed since high school. I found myself genuinely fascinated by the social dynamics at play. How quickly they'd fallen back into old patterns, old hierarchies, old needs to establish dominance. Speaking of practical, Jessica said, turning back to me with renewed interest, what's your retirement plan looking like? I mean, government pensions are decent, but with inflation these days, she trailed off, shaking her head with practiced concern. Before I could answer, a new voice joined the conversation. Well, well, if it isn't the gang from AP Chemistry. We all turned to see Amanda Foster approaching, and the energy of the group immediately shifted. Amanda had been the golden child of Jefferson High, valedictorian, prom queen, class president, and the girl everyone assumed would conquer the world. Her arrival commanded attention in a way that was both effortless and absolute. She looked stunning, of course. Her auburn hair fell in perfect waves, her emerald dress was clearly couture, and she moved with the confidence that comes from years of being the center of attention. But there was something else now, a sharpness around her eyes, a tension in her smile that spoke of battles fought and won in boardrooms across the country. "Amanda!" Madison breathed, and I could hear the mixture of excitement and competitive anxiety in her voice. "You look incredible. How's the pharmaceutical empire?" Amanda's laugh was like champagne bubbles, effervescent but with an edge. "Oh, you know how it is. Just closed a merger that'll probably make headlines next month. Can't say too much yet, but let's just say someone's about to own a significant portion of the biotech market." She accepted a fresh glass of champagne from a passing waiter with the casual authority of someone accustomed to being served.
No, let me finish. I leaned forward. You taught me that family comes first, that blood is thicker than water. But when I tried to do the right thing, when I tried to protect people who couldn't protect themselves, you chose money over family. You chose Elena Vasquez over your own niece. Tears were running down his face now. I was scared. They said they'd kill both of us if I didn't cooperate. I thought if I could just keep you away from the business side, keep you focused on legitimate work. You thought you could protect me by lying to me? I thought I could protect you by keeping you ignorant. I was wrong about that too. I sat back in my chair, looking at this man who'd been the most important person in my life for 6 years. Uncle Raymond, who'd signed my report cards and driven me to doctor's appointments and taught me that hard work was the foundation of a good life. Prison had stripped away his defenses, forced him to confront what he'd become. The investigation found evidence that Elena's network was responsible for at least 47 disappearances over 8 years, I said. 47 families who never got closure, never found out what happened to their loved ones. I know. Carlos Mendez almost became number 48 because he testified against you. I know that too. And you're going to spend the next 25 years here thinking about all of it. He nodded, unable to speak. I reached across the table and took his hand. It was smaller than I remembered, more fragile. I forgive you. The words surprised both of us. I hadn't planned to say them, hadn't even known I felt them until they came out of my mouth. You don't need to. Yes, I do. I squeezed his hand because you're still my uncle, because you did raise me, and you did teach me important things about life and work and responsibility. You lost your way, but that doesn't erase everything you did right. I don't deserve your forgiveness. Forgiveness isn't about what you deserve. It's about what I need to move forward with my life. We sat in silence for a few minutes, holding hands across the metal table while other inmates and their families conducted their own difficult conversations around us. What happens now?
Raymond finally asked. Now I go back to my life. Marcus and I are moving to Denver next month. The Army approved his transfer to Peterson Space Force Base, and the FBI helped me get admitted to community college there. I'm going to study criminal justice. Following in Detective Torres's footsteps? Something like that. I figure if I'm going to keep getting involved in criminal investigations, I might as well make it official. And us? Will I ever see you again? I considered the question honestly. I don't know. Maybe when you get out, if you get out. But Raymond, if that day comes, you need to understand something. The man I visit won't be my guardian anymore. He'll just be someone I used to know who's trying to rebuild his life. I understand. I stood up, and he did the same. For a moment, I thought about hugging him goodbye, but it didn't feel right. Too much had changed between us for that kind of gesture. Take care of yourself, Uncle Raymond. You too, Sophia. And tell Marcus... He paused, searching for words. Tell him he did good, protecting his sister. Tell him I'm proud of the man he became. I walked out of the prison and into the Arizona sunshine, where Marcus was waiting by our rental car. He was wearing civilian clothes, jeans and a t-shirt, but he still carried himself like a soldier. How did it go? Better than I expected, worse than I hoped. I got into the passenger seat and buckled my seatbelt. He said to tell you he's proud of the man you became. Marcus started the engine. What about you? Are you proud of the woman you became? I thought about the question as we drove away from the prison. 6 months ago, I'd been a scared 23-year-old, living in a studio apartment and working 2 jobs just to survive. I'd been alone, threatened, running from dangerous people who wanted to silence me. Today, I was someone who'd helped bring down a criminal network, who'd saved lives, who'd found the courage to forgive the person who'd hurt her most. I had my brother beside me, a future ahead of me, and the knowledge that I'd chosen to do the right thing even when it cost me everything. To Sarah, the group echoed, and there was something almost ritualistic about it. They were toasting their own mythology, their own story about success and sacrifice, and the different paths a person could choose. Amanda stepped closer to me, her expression more serious now. I'm curious, though, don't you ever wonder what might have been? I mean, you were brilliant in high school, top of the class in sciences, incredible analytical mind. You could have gone anywhere, done anything. I did go somewhere, I replied simply. I did do something. Of course, she said quickly. I didn't mean to imply otherwise. It's just, well, consulting for the government. It seems like such a narrow application of your talents. Jessica nodded in agreement. That's what I was thinking earlier. With your mind, you could have been running your own firm by now, maybe even competing with Amanda's company. Instead, you're... She gestured vaguely, unable to finish the sentence without sounding insulting. Content, I finished for her. I'm content. The word seemed to hang in the air like a foreign concept. Content. Not driven, not ambitious, not constantly reaching for more, just content. For a group of people who'd spent decades climbing ladders and accumulating achievements, it was almost incomprehensible. Amanda's phone buzzed, and she glanced at it with practiced efficiency. Sorry, just need to check this. Jakarta's market opens in an hour, and we've got a situation with one of our manufacturing partners. She tapped out a quick response, her fingers flying over the screen. The global economy never sleeps, unfortunately. Jenny was frantically texting, her thumbs moving rapidly across her screen. 3 of my boutiques, she said to no one in particular. They're saying federal marshals. Fashion boutiques! What could federal marshals possibly want with fashion boutiques? The irony wasn't lost on me. An hour ago, these same people had been sympathetically discussing my simple government job, my modest ambitions, my practical choices. Now they were all desperately trying to reach government officials, government offices, anyone with government authority who might explain why their private empires were suddenly under federal scrutiny. Marcus ended his call and immediately started another one. Senator Blackwood, it's Marcus Thompson. I need to understand what's happening here. My entire development project has been shut down, and they're telling me it's a matter of national security. National security, Senator? I built condominiums. The phrase national security seemed to ripple through the group like a stone thrown into still water. These were successful people, important people in their own spheres, but none of them had ever had their businesses associated with anything approaching national security. Derek was pacing now, his phone pressed to his ear. What do you mean you can't tell me? I own the company. You're my own legal department. His voice cracked slightly on the last word. I stood in the center of their growing chaos, sipping my champagne and watching the evening's social dynamics undergo a complete reversal. The people who'd been so confident, so secure in their understanding of how the world worked, were discovering that there were layers of that world they'd never even suspected. Amanda returned to the group, her face pale but determined. Listen, everyone, I think we need to stay calm. There's obviously some kind of coordinated federal action happening tonight, but I'm sure it's just a misunderstanding. These things get sorted out at the highest levels. Her voice carried the authority of someone accustomed to solving problems with phone calls and connections, but there was an underlying tension that suggested even her highest level contacts weren't providing the reassurance she expected. Tommy looked up from his phone, his expression somewhere between bewildered and frightened. My lawyer can't even get through to anyone at the Justice Department. He says all the lines are busy. All of them! That's impossible, Jessica said automatically. The Justice Department doesn't just stop taking calls. But even as she said it, her own phone was ringing again. She answered with visible reluctance. Yes? What? No, that can't be right. Check again. A long pause. Frozen? What do you mean frozen? Madison, who'd been unusually quiet during this technological storm, suddenly spoke up. Has anyone else noticed that Sarah's phone hasn't rung once? The observation fell into the conversation like a lead weight. All eyes turned to me, and I could see the gears turning in their heads. In a room full of successful people whose businesses were apparently under simultaneous federal investigation, the one person whose phone remained silent was the one who worked for the government. Amanda's eyes narrowed slightly. That's interesting. Sarah, you said you work in consulting. What kind of consulting exactly? Various kinds, I replied. The same answer I'd been giving all evening. But now that answer carries different implications. When they had assumed I was unsuccessful, my vague responses had seemed embarrassment about a modest career. Now, with their own careers apparently under federal scrutiny, my evasiveness suggested something else entirely. Patricia's voice was small when she spoke. Sarah, do you know what's happening? It was a simple question, but it carried the weight of their growing realization that perhaps, just perhaps, they'd misunderstood something fundamental about this evening. Derek's phone rang again, and this time his conversation was brief and one-sided. Uh-huh. Yes, I understand. No, I'll wait for further instructions. He hung up and looked around the group with an expression of complete bewilderment. They're telling me not to leave the city. Not to leave the city. Like I'm some kind of flight risk, Amanda finished quietly. The ballroom around us continued its celebration, but our little circle had become an island of growing tension in a sea of oblivious revelry. Other reunion attendees laughed and danced and caught up on 25 years of life, completely unaware that some of their former classmates were watching their carefully constructed worlds shift beneath their feet. Marcus sat down heavily in a nearby chair. I don't understand this.
I build residential properties, good properties, honest properties. I employ 300 people. I donate to charity. I'm on the hospital board. What could I possibly have done that warrants federal attention? It was a reasonable question, and the fear in his voice was genuine. These weren't criminals or conspirators. They were successful people who'd built their lives within what they understood to be the normal boundaries of business and society. Stephanie looked up from her phone, tears threatening her carefully applied mascara. They've sealed my financial records, all of them, personal and business, 20 years of records, and they're saying I can't access them without federal approval.
The pieces of their evening were falling apart in real time, and I could see the exact moment when their focus shifted from their individual crises to the one constant in the room, me, standing calm and unbothered while their worlds crumbled around them. Amanda stepped closer, her executive composure finally cracking. "Sarah, I need you to be completely honest with me. What exactly do you do for the government?" Before I could answer, the unmistakable sound of helicopter rotors began to thump in the distance, growing louder by the second. The helicopter sound grew from a distant whisper to a thunderous presence that seemed to shake the very foundations of the Grand Meridian Hotel. Through the ballroom's floor-to-ceiling windows, we could see searchlights cutting through the darkness, illuminating the hotel's manicured grounds with stark, white intensity. The reunion celebration around us began to falter. Conversations died mid-sentence as heads turned toward the windows. The band's upbeat rendition of an 80s classic wavered and stopped entirely as even the musicians became distracted by the mechanical thunder overhead. "What the hell is that?" Derek whispered, his face pressed against the glass. Amanda had gone completely still, her phone forgotten in her hand. "That's not a news helicopter," she said quietly. "That's military." The rotors were so loud now that the crystal chandeliers began to vibrate, creating a delicate chiming that mixed with the mechanical roar and an almost surreal symphony. Other reunion attendees were crowding around the windows now, pointing and speculating, their voices rising to compete with the noise. Tommy grabbed my arm, his grip tight enough to leave marks. "Sarah, you need to tell us what's happening, right now." Before I could respond, the ballroom's main doors burst open with enough force to bang against the walls. The sound echoed through the space like gunshots, causing several people to scream and duck instinctively. 6 figures in dark suits moved through the doorway with military precision, their eyes scanning the room with the systematic efficiency of people accustomed to assessing threats quickly. They wore earpieces and their hands rested casually but meaningfully near their jackets. The lead figure, a woman with steel gray hair and the posture of someone who'd never doubted her own authority, strode directly toward our group. The entire ballroom had gone silent now, 300 people frozen in place as if someone had pressed pause on their lives. The only sounds were the helicopter rotors outside and the sharp click of the lead agent's heels on the marble floor. She stopped directly in front of me, and I noticed that Amanda unconsciously stepped backward, creating space between herself and whatever was about to happen. "Ma'am," the agent said, her voice carrying clearly despite the helicopter noise, "you're needed." The words hung in the air like a challenge to everything my former classmates thought they understood about the world. I set down my champagne glass on a nearby table with deliberate care, the tiny clink of crystal on wood somehow audible in the vast silence of the ballroom. "How urgent?" I asked. "Condition red," the agent replied without hesitation. I nodded, understanding immediately. Around me, I could feel my classmates' confusion deepening. They were watching an exchange that followed rules they didn't know existed, using language they'd never heard, operating within a reality they'd never imagined. "I'll need 5 minutes to brief my security detail," I said, glancing at my watch. The agent shook her head. "Ma'am, the detail is already in position, the package is secure, and transport is standing by. The situation has escalated beyond our initial projections." Marcus made a sound somewhere between a laugh and a sob.
Package? Security detail? Sarah, what the hell is going on? I turned to face the group that had spent the evening categorizing my life, explaining my choices, pitying my lack of ambition. Their faces showed a fascinating spectrum of emotions: confusion, fear, dawning realization, and something that might have been the first stirrings of understanding. The consulting I mentioned, I said quietly, my voice somehow carrying despite the helicopter noise, is a bit more specialized than I indicated. Jessica's mouth opened and closed wordlessly. She looked like someone trying to solve an equation where all the variables had suddenly changed values. Amanda found her voice first, though it came out as barely more than a whisper. Specialized how? The lead agent stepped forward slightly, a subtle movement that somehow conveyed both protection and urgency. Ma'am, we really do need to move. The Prime Minister's flight lands in 40 minutes, and the Joint Chiefs are waiting for your assessment.
The world's Prime Minister and Joint Chiefs hit the group like physical blows. These were phrases from news broadcasts, from political thrillers, from a world of power and consequence that existed far beyond their understanding of success and importance. Stephanie was staring at me with wide eyes. Joint Chiefs? As in the military Joint Chiefs? Among others, I replied, then turned back to the agent. Has the secretary been briefed on the London intelligence? Yes, ma'am. She's coordinating with our allies now, but she specifically requested your analysis before proceeding with the response protocol. Derek's legs seemed to give out, and he sat down heavily in the nearest chair. Response protocol? He repeated numbly. You're talking about, what, international incidents? Military responses? The agent's earpiece crackled to life, and she pressed her finger to it briefly. Her expression grew even more serious, if that were possible. Ma'am, the helicopter is Marine One's escort. We have a direct flight path to Andrews, then immediate transport to the Situation Room. The phrase Marine One sent another wave of shock through the group. Marine One, the president's helicopter. They were talking about the president's helicopter as casually as discussing a taxi. Amanda had gone completely pale. The Situation Room? As in the White House Situation Room? Ma'am, the agent said, addressing me again, the president is expecting your briefing in 90 minutes. I could actually see the moment when reality hit them, when the impossible became undeniably real. These people who'd spent the evening feeling superior to my modest government career were suddenly faced with the fact that I apparently briefed the President of the United States on matters important enough to warrant military helicopters and emergency protocols. Tommy's voice came out as a croak. You brief the President? When necessary, I replied simply. Patricia was crying now, her makeup running in dark streams down her cheeks. Not from sadness, but from the overwhelming realization of how completely she'd misunderstood everything. We all thought you were just a low-level government employee with no ambition and no real success. I know what you thought. Marcus stood up slowly, his face a mask of confusion and something approaching horror. But all evening, you let us think. I let you think what you needed to think, what you were comfortable thinking. The agent's earpiece crackled again, and her expression grew urgent. Ma'am, we have updates from 3 different intelligence agencies, and the situation is evolving rapidly. The National Security Advisor is requesting immediate consultation. Jessica found her voice, though it came out strangled. National Security Advisor? Sarah, who are you? The agent answered before I could. Ma'am, with respect, we really cannot delay any longer. The security implications of each passing minute are significant. I nodded and took one last look around the group. These people who'd built their identities around their material success, their business achievements, their accumulation of wealth and status, were discovering that there were levels of importance they'd never even suspected existed. Amanda, I said, addressing her directly, you asked earlier if I ever wondered what might have been. The truth is, I never had to wonder. I've been exactly where I needed to be, doing exactly what needed to be done. The helicopter rotors outside shifted pitch, preparing for a departure.
Through the windows, we could see additional aircraft arriving, a formation of military helicopters that turned the hotel grounds into something resembling a combat zone. "Ma'am," the agent said, her voice carrying final authority, "it's time." As I moved toward the door, surrounded by the security detail that had materialized around me with professional efficiency, I heard Amanda's voice one last time, barely audible over the mechanical thunder. "Sarah, what do you actually do?" I paused at the ballroom entrance and looked back at the group one final time. "I keep the world from ending," I said simply. "It's more demanding than you might think, but the benefits package is excellent." And with that, I walked out of their small world of business success and social hierarchies and back into the larger world where the real decisions were made. The night air hit my face as we exited the hotel, and the full scope of the operation became visible. What I assumed was a single helicopter was actually a coordinated aerial response involving 6 aircraft arranged in a precise formation across the hotel gardens. Floodlights had transformed the manicured gardens into a landing zone, and I could see dark figures positioned at strategic points around the perimeter.
"Dr. Chen," the lead agent said as we walked briskly toward the primary aircraft, "we have preliminary reports from Berlin, Tokyo, and Sao Paulo. The pattern you predicted is manifesting across all major financial centers simultaneously." Dr. Chen. Not Ms. Chen, not ma'am, but Dr. Chen. The title that none of my former classmates had ever thought to ask about. The qualification that might have given them a clue about the nature of my work if they'd been curious enough to inquire. "Cyber attacks or human intelligence?" I asked, my mind already shifting into the analytical mode that had defined most of my adult life. "Both," she replied grimly. "The algorithms you developed last year are showing correlation patterns we've never seen before. Treasury is reporting anomalous trading activities that started approximately 4 hours ago, right around the time you indicated they would." 4 hours ago, I'd been getting dressed for a high school reunion, carefully choosing a simple black dress that would help me blend into the background of my former classmates' celebration. The irony of timing wasn't lost on me. While they'd been preparing to showcase their success, I'd been monitoring intelligence reports about coordinated economic warfare. We reached the helicopter, and I could see through its windows that it was equipped with technology that definitely didn't belong on civilian aircraft. Multiple screens showed data streams, satellite feeds, and communication channels that connected directly to the most secure networks in the world. Behind us, I could hear voices from the hotel. My former classmates had followed us outside, along with dozens of other reunion attendees who'd been drawn by the spectacle. Through the distance and helicopter noise, I could make out fragments of their conversations. Confused speculation, urgent phone calls, desperate attempts to understand what they were witnessing. "Ma'am," another agent appeared at my elbow, "we have the Australian Prime Minister holding on Secure Line 3, and the Bank of England governor is requesting immediate consultation. The ripple effects are moving faster than our initial models predicted." As I climbed into the helicopter, I caught a glimpse of Amanda standing at the hotel's entrance, her phone still pressed to her ear, but her attention focused entirely on me. Even from 50 yards away, I could see the expression on her face, the look of someone whose entire understanding of reality had just been fundamentally challenged. The helicopter's interior was a mobile command center that put most corporate offices to shame. 3 analysts were already at work, their fingers flying across keyboards as data streams flowed across multiple monitors. One screen showed global financial markets in real time, another displayed satellite imagery of major cities around the world, and a third tracked communication intercepts from sources I couldn't identify from my brief glance. "Dr. Chen," one of the analysts looked up as I settled into the specially configured seat. "The London market opened 12 minutes ago, and we're seeing the exact volatility patterns your model predicted. Sterling is down 4% and falling." I nodded, accepting the secure tablet that contained my briefing materials. The helicopter lifted off with surprising smoothness, and through the window I could see the Grand Meridian Hotel falling away beneath us. The reunion attendees on the ground looked like tiny figures illuminated by the aircraft's powerful lights, and I wondered what stories they would tell about this night. "Beijing is responding as expected," another analyst reported. "Their central bank issued a statement 30 minutes ago that matches Scenario 7 from your threat assessment." Scenario 7.
I'd written that analysis 6 months ago, gaming out potential economic warfare tactics that could destabilize multiple currencies simultaneously. At the time, it had seemed like an academic exercise, a complex puzzle designed to test our defensive capabilities. I'd never imagined I'd be implementing countermeasures from the back of a military helicopter while wearing a cocktail dress. The lead agent handed me a secure phone. Secretary Morrison wants to brief you personally before we reach Andrews. Secretary Morrison. Not the Senator Morrison that Amanda had been trying to reach for help with her pharmaceutical company's troubles, but Defense Secretary Morrison, whose 3 a.m. phone calls had become an unfortunate but necessary part of my routine over the past year. Sarah, the secretary's voice came through clearly despite the encryption. I know this interrupted your evening, but we're looking at a coordinated attack on 7 different fronts. Your economic modeling from last quarter is the only thing that predicted the sequence. Through the helicopter's windows, I could see we were already approaching Andrews Air Force Base, where Air Force 2 was waiting with engines spooled and ready for immediate departure. The transition from hotel ballroom to the highest levels of national security response had taken less than 15 minutes. The pattern suggests a test run, I replied, scrolling through the preliminary data on my tablet. They're probing our response times and coordination capabilities. This isn't the main event. That's what we're afraid of. How long do we have? I studied the data streams, cross-referencing them with behavioral models I'd been developing for the past 3 years. The numbers told a story that was both fascinating and terrifying. A chess game being played across global markets by opponents who understood economic warfare as well as we did.
72 hours, I said finally. Maybe less if they accelerate the timeline. The helicopter touched down at Andrews with military precision, and I could see the distinctive blue and white aircraft that would carry me into the next phase of what was shaping up to be a very long night. Through the windows, Air Force Two's interior was already buzzing with activity. Staff members, analysts, and officials who'd been pulled from their Saturday evening plans just as I had been. As we transferred from helicopter to aircraft, I caught sight of my reflection in one of the windows. The woman looking back at me was the same one who'd stood calmly in that hotel ballroom while successful business leaders panicked around her. Same black dress, same simple hairstyle, same understated appearance that had led my classmates to assume I was unsuccessful, unambitious, unremarkable. But the context had changed everything. The modest government employee they'd pitied was now stepping onto the aircraft that served as a mobile command center for protecting national security. The woman they'd offered career advice to was being flown to brief the president on matters that could affect millions of lives. "Dr. Chen," a new voice called as I entered the aircraft, "we have updates from the Federal Reserve. The intervention protocols you designed are holding, but barely. We need your assessment on whether to implement the more aggressive countermeasures." I settled into the configured workspace, surrounded by screens and secure communication lines that connected me to intelligence agencies, central banks, and government leaders across 6 continents. This was my real office, not a cubicle in some anonymous government building, but a mobile nerve center that could be deployed anywhere in the world within hours. The irony wasn't lost on me as I began reviewing the crisis data. A few miles away, my former classmates were probably still standing outside the Grand Meridian Hotel, trying to process what they'd witnessed. They'd spent the evening discussing their success in terms of money earned, properties owned, companies built. But success, real success, sometimes meant being the person who got called when the world started falling apart. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Sarah, this is Amanda. I don't know what's happening, but if there's anything you need, anything at all, please let me know. I think I owe you an apology." I smiled slightly as I typed back, "No apology necessary. Enjoy the rest of the reunion." Through the aircraft's windows, I could see we were already airborne, the lights of the Washington metropolitan area spreading out below us like a constellation. Somewhere down there, people were going about their Saturday night routines. Dinner, movies, time with family.
blissfully unaware that teams of analysts and agents were working through the night to ensure those routines could continue uninterrupted. "Dr. Chen," a new voice called as I entered the aircraft, "we have updates from the Federal Reserve. The intervention protocols you designed are holding, but barely. We need your assessment on whether to implement the more aggressive countermeasures." I settled into the configured workspace, surrounded by screens and secure communication lines that connected me to intelligence agencies, central banks, and government leaders across 6 continents. This was my real office, not a cubicle in some anonymous government building, but a mobile nerve center that could be deployed anywhere in the world within hours. The irony wasn't lost on me as I began reviewing the crisis data. A few miles away, my former classmates were probably still standing outside the Grand Meridian Hotel, trying to process what they'd witnessed. They'd spent the evening discussing their success in terms of money earned, properties owned, companies built. But success, real success, sometimes meant being the person who got called when the world started falling apart. The White House Situation Room at midnight looked exactly like what it was, the nerve center of the most powerful nation on Earth operating at full capacity. Banks of monitors displayed real-time data from every corner of the globe, while staff members moved with the choreographed efficiency of people who trained for exactly this kind of crisis. President Williams looked up as I entered, her expression grim but focused. "Dr. Chen, thank you for coming in on such short notice. I understand we pulled you away from a social engagement." "Just a high school reunion, Madam President," I replied, taking my seat at the familiar conference table where I had spent countless hours over the past 4 years. "Well," she said with a slight smile that didn't reach her eyes, "I hope it was worth the interruption. Walk me through what we're facing."
I activated the central display system, and the room's main screen filled with a complex web of interconnected data points spanning 6 continents. We're dealing with what appears to be a coordinated probe of our economic and cyber defense systems. The attacks began approximately 6 hours ago with small-scale market manipulations in Asian markets, then escalated through European trading sessions. Defense Secretary Morrison leaned forward. "Your models predicted this exact sequence 3 months ago. How did you know?" "Pattern recognition," I replied, highlighting specific data points on the screen. "The attackers have been testing individual components of our financial infrastructure for 18 months, but never simultaneously. Each probe was designed to look like normal market volatility or routine cyber intrusions. However, when analyzed as a collective dataset, they revealed a sophisticated intelligence-gathering operation." CIA Director Patterson nodded grimly. "And tonight was the comprehensive test." "Exactly. They wanted to see our response times, our coordination capabilities, and our defensive protocols under simultaneous pressure. What they discovered is that we've been watching them watch us." I pulled up another screen showing the counterintelligence operation we'd been running in parallel. Every test they conducted also provided us with data about their capabilities, their command structure, and their strategic objectives. Tonight's attack wasn't just them testing us, it was us confirming our assessment of them. The president studied the displays with the focused attention that had characterized her approach to national security throughout her administration. What's their next move? Based on the behavioral algorithms and the specific targets they chose tonight, they're planning a coordinated assault on our critical infrastructure within the next 60 to 72 hours. Banking systems, power grids, communication networks, and transportation hubs, all simultaneously. Treasury Secretary Kumar, who'd been silent until now, spoke up. "The economic implications alone could trigger a global recession. If they succeed in destabilizing our financial systems while simultaneously attacking infrastructure, it would be the digital equivalent of Pearl Harbor. Except this time, the attack would come through fiber optic cables and trading algorithms instead of bombers." The room fell silent as the implications sank in. This wasn't just another cybersecurity briefing or routine threat assessment. We were discussing a coordinated attack on the fundamental systems that kept modern civilization functioning. "What's our options?" the president asked. I manipulated the display to show our prepared countermeasures. We have 3 scenarios. Defensive posture, we strengthen our existing systems and wait for the attack. Preemptive strike, we disable their capabilities before they can launch. Or comprehensive disruption, we turn their own intelligence gathering operation against them. "Explain the third option," Director Patterson said, leaning forward with interest. "For 18 months, they've been probing our systems, but we've been feeding them carefully crafted responses, showing them what we wanted them to see, hiding our true capabilities while learning everything about theirs. They think they understand our vulnerabilities. They're wrong." I pulled up a new display showing the elaborate deception operation we'd been running in parallel. Every defensive response they observed was theater. Every apparent weakness was bait. They've built their entire attack strategy around exploiting vulnerabilities that don't actually exist. Secretary Morrison smiled for the first time that evening. "So when they attack, they'll be attacking phantom targets while we systematically dismantle their actual infrastructure. It's a classic misdirection on a global scale." The president stood and walked to the main display, studying the intricate web of connections and countermeasures. "Dr. Chen, how confident are you in this assessment?" 93.7% based on current data. The remaining uncertainty factors are primarily related to variables outside their control. Natural disasters, unrelated political events, that sort of thing. "And if you're wrong?" "If I'm wrong, Madam President, we'll be dealing with the most sophisticated attack on American infrastructure in our nation's history, launched by adversaries who understand our systems better than we do." The weight of that possibility settled over the room like a heavy blanket. These were people accustomed to making decisions with life and death consequences. But the scale of what we were discussing went beyond anything in recent memory. "There's something else," I continued, activating a new data stream. "The timing of tonight's probe wasn't random. They chose a Saturday evening when they assumed key personnel would be offline, response times would be slower, and coordination would be compromised. But we were ready," the president observed, "because we've been anticipating this specific scenario for 8 months. Every major crisis response official had discrete security details positioned within 30 minutes of their locations tonight. Every critical analyst was on standby. Every communication system was pre-positioned for immediate deployment."
Director Patterson raised an eyebrow. "Including extracting you from a high school reunion." "The reunion was actually perfect cover," I admitted. "Anyone monitoring our communications would have seen normal social media posts, casual text messages, typical Saturday evening activities. Meanwhile, our entire crisis response team was positioned and ready to activate within minutes." The president returned to her seat, her expression thoughtful. "So while your classmates were discussing their business achievements, I was monitoring early indicators of what could become the largest coordinated attack on American economic infrastructure in decades," I finished. The contrast wasn't lost on me. Secretary Kumar pulled up financial data on his tablet. "Speaking of your classmates, several of their businesses were flagged in tonight's probe. The pharmaceutical company, the real estate development firm, the investment group, they were all targeted for specific data extraction." "Collateral intelligence gathering," I explained. "Our adversaries weren't specifically targeting Amanda Foster's pharmaceutical patents or Marcus Thompson's property developments. They were mapping the entire economic ecosystem, understanding how disruption in one sector would cascade through others." "But their businesses aren't actually compromised?" the president asked. No more than any other American companies operating in globally connected markets. The federal actions tonight were precautionary, securing their data and communications to prevent intelligence exploitation. By Monday morning, they'll be able to resume normal operations with enhanced security protocols. I thought about my former classmates, probably still standing outside the Grand Meridian Hotel, trying to process the evening's events. They'd built successful businesses and comfortable lives, but they'd never had to consider how those achievements might be weaponized by foreign adversaries in a global economic conflict. The broader question, I continued, is whether we proceed with comprehensive disruption or wait for them to make the first move. The president looked around the table at her senior advisors, gauging their reactions to the options I'd presented. This was the moment when theoretical threat assessment became real-world decision-making, when academic models translated into actions that would affect millions of people. Dr. Chen, in your professional opinion, what's the right choice? I'd been preparing for this question for months, running countless simulations and behavioral analyses, but sitting in the Situation Room at 12:47 a.m., still wearing the dress I'd chosen for a high school reunion, the weight of the decision felt different than it had in theoretical exercises. Comprehensive disruption, I said without hesitation. We have a narrow window where they believe they hold informational advantage. If we wait for them to attack, we'll be responding to their timeline, their chosen targets, their preferred terms of engagement. If we act now, we dictate the parameters of the conflict. The president nodded slowly. Authorization granted. Dr. Chen, you have full operational authority to implement comprehensive disruption protocols. As I began the process of activating countermeasures that would ripple across global networks in ways most people would never understand, I reflected on the strange journey from hotel ballroom to situation room. My former classmates had measured success in terms of personal accumulation, money, property, status, recognition. Those weren't meaningless achievements, but they represented just one dimension of human accomplishment. Real success, I'd learned, sometimes meant being invisible until the moment you were desperately needed. It meant developing expertise that hopefully would never be used, preparing for crises that might never come, and being ready to sacrifice personal comfort for collective security. As the first phase of our counter-operation launched across fiber optic networks spanning 3 continents, I thought about Amanda's question from earlier in the evening. Don't you ever wonder what might have been? The truth is, I knew exactly what might have been. I could have chosen the pharmaceutical route, or gone into private consulting, or built my own technology company. I had the credentials, the intelligence, and the opportunities. I probably could have made 10 times my government salary and earned the kind of recognition my classmates valued. But then, who would have been sitting in this chair tonight, analyzing threat patterns and coordinating global response protocols while democracy itself hung in the balance? Sometimes, the most important job in the room is the one nobody knows exists. And sometimes, just sometimes, that's exactly where you want to be. The operation would continue through the night and into the following days, invisible to most of the world, but absolutely critical to its continued functioning. By Monday morning, the crisis would be resolved, the threats neutralized, and life would continue as normal for millions of people who would never know how close they had come to disaster. And somewhere in Westchester County, a pharmaceutical executive would probably still be trying to figure out exactly what had happened at their high school reunion and why the quiet girl from chemistry class had walked out of their conversation and into a presidential helicopter.
Success, I'd discovered, wasn't always about the applause you received. Sometimes it was about the disasters you prevented, the crises you resolved, and the world you protected while everyone else was sleeping soundly in beds they didn't realize had almost been lost. Looking for more? We've got 2 amazing stories ready for you right on screen. If this one touched you, these are absolutely worth your time. Click to watch them now. And hey, subscribe and hit that bell to never miss our latest uploads.